My 6-year-old daughter looked across the dinner table and said the words I had refused to admit for 10 years. Mom, Dad doesn't want to talk to you, can't you see that? Ethan did not correct her. He did not look embarrassed or tell Daisy that her mother deserved respect. Simply kept eating while I sat there with another unfinished question in my mouth. I had only asked whether he wanted to take Daisy to the park on Saturday. For 10 years, I had chased my husband through every silence that night. Our daughter taught me to stop after dinner. I bathed Daisy, read her 2 stories, and tucked her into bed. When I returned to our bedroom, Ethan was leaning against the headboard, scrolling through his phone. The blue light covered his face. He did not lift his eyes. Usually I would sit beside him and ask if we could talk. He would talk about what, then I would speak for ages, while he answered with a distracted sound, hold over, and went to sleep. I would stare at his back until my pillow was wet. That night, I took a blanket and went to the study instead. The folding bed, there was something I had bought, and case we ever needed space after an argument. Later I learned Ethan and I could not even fight. Fighting required 2 people. He never engaged. My mother texted to ask whether I had had a good day. I replied the way I always did, pretty good. For 10 years, I had sent Ethan paragraph after paragraph. If he ignored them, I sent more. If he hung up, I waited at the door for him to come home. Friends called me clingy. Ethan called me needy. I began to believe I was the problem. I had learned to measure every day by his attention. A short reply could make me happy for hours. A missed call could keep me awake all night. Whenever he pulled farther away, I responded by trying harder, as if love were a door that would open if I knocked long enough. But Daisy's question cracked something open inside me. It was not my heart, it was the obsession that had kept me running after a man who never turned around. That night I slept without checking my phone once. The next morning I made breakfast only for Daisy. I braided her hair while Ethan came downstairs and glanced at the table. He said nothing, took milk from the refrigerator, picked up his briefcase, and left. Every weekday before that his breakfast had been waiting. Sometimes he ate it more often. He took coffee and walked away without thanks. I still cooked again the next morning because I treated every ignored plate as another chance to prove I was worth noticing. The closing door sounded exactly as it had for thousands of mornings. For the first time, I did not run after him to say, drive safe. Daisy looked up at me. Mom, you didn't say goodbye to Dad, did you? She shook her head. He walked away too fast. Always did, and I had spent 10 years chasing without catching him. Once Ethan and I met in college. He was quiet and distant, the kind of man people admired from afar. I was the woman who crossed that distance. Everyone knew Madison was chasing Ethan. In the winter of our senior year, he finally agreed to date me. I cried for an hour because I thought persistence had won me love. Years later, I heard his mother explain the truth as if it were nothing. Ethan never takes initiative. You chased him so persistently, so he just said yes. I was standing in the kitchen with a plate of fruit in my hands. I remember gripping the edge until my fingers hurt. The first year of marriage was tolerable. He would walk with me on weekends, and if I asked to see a movie, he complained, but came along. Everything changed after Daisy was born. I handled postpartum recovery and the baby alone. Ethan was always working late, traveling, or attending dinners. When I broke down after staying awake all night to feed Daisy, he said, Daisy has you, doesn't she? Once I asked him to come home earlier. Can you stop being like this? He said, I'm tired too. Another night, I asked him for one simple thing. Can you just hold me? He sighed and closed the bedroom door between us. I was breastfeeding through the night, exhausted enough to break down while he explained that Daisy already had me. The sentence reduced fatherhood to an optional role and turned my exhaustion into something I was expected to manage alone. I still did not stop chasing. In college, I had ranked first in my major. My graduation project won honors, and my advisor recommended me to a design firm. I turned it down because Ethan had accepted a position in the city. Later, after Daisy was born, I gave up my job entirely. It's better if you stay home. Ethan said it saves us from hiring a nanny. The firm I rejected went on to win industry awards. Sometimes I saw its work online and stared for a long time. Then I locked my phone and returned to washing bottles. I never blamed Ethan out loud. I told myself I had chosen our family, chosen the city, and chosen to stay home. It took years to understand how often those choices appeared only after Ethan had already decided what was convenient for him. During the first week after I stopped chasing Ethan, my hand kept reaching for my phone. Then I remembered there was nothing to check because I had sent nothing. On the third day, instead of going straight home after work, I entered a gym I had passed before the receptionist offered me a trial class. I'll take an annual membership. It cost $3,600. I swiped my card without messaging Ethan for permission, or even telling him afterward. It was the first significant amount I had spent on myself, without reporting it like a child. On the fifth day, I pulled an old gray canvas bag from the corner. Inside were my college sketches, design drafts, and the expired offer letter. Daisy leaned over the pages. "I drew this, Mom. It's so pretty. I used to draw. Can't you draw anymore?" I looked at her earnest face. "I still can. I just haven't in a long time." After she fell asleep, I cleared the dining table and began. My hand was rusty and the lines were not as clean as they used to be. But when I finished the final stroke, something inside me loosened for 2 weeks, then noticed nothing. I stopped messaging him, and he never asked why. I stopped calling, and he did not call me. I stopped waiting at the door, and he came home, changed his shoes, looked at his phone, and slept. My absence changed nothing for him. That was the cruelest evidence, and also the cleanest. I did not need to test him, accuse him, or search his phone. I merely stopped carrying the entire relationship, and nothing moved toward me. At first, that truth hurt. Then it freed me. If chasing him for 10 years had made so little difference, there was no reason to waste an 11th. My college friend Sarah invited me to dinner. She studied me across the table and said, "You look better usually. The first thing you tell me is that Ethan ignored your messages. You haven't mentioned him once." I stopped chasing. Sarah froze, then set down her fork and applauded 3 times right in the steakhouse. "Madison, that's the clearest thing you've said in 10 years. Nearly cried, but this time they would not have been tears for Ethan. In the 3rd week, his mother Helen came to stay. She looked around the living room and immediately noticed I had not prepared the house for her as carefully as before. "Why haven't you been tidying lately? Used to keep everything spotless." I had been going to the gym after work and drawing when I came home. There was not enough time to perform perfection for her. I've been busy. It was true. After work, I went to the gym. At home, I drew. The hours I once spent polishing the house before Helen's visits now belonged to me and Daisy. Helen glanced at Ethan. To my surprise, he said, "Mom, it's fine. The house is clean." The next day, while he was out, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Is something wrong between you and Ethan? Why don't you talk to him anymore?" I kept cutting vegetables. "You told me I was too clingy and that men needed space." Smile stiffened. "I said that for your own good. Women shouldn't be too forward. You need to be reserved." I tipped the vegetables into a bowl. "See, now I'm being reserved," she called me passive-aggressive, then muttered that I was becoming disrespectful. In the past, I would have panicked and apologized. Now I understood that disrespectful simply meant I was no longer easy to control. Before Helen left, she spoke privately with Ethan on the balcony for 15 minutes. I stayed in the living room coloring with Daisy, unable to hear a word. When Ethan came back inside, his expression was complicated. He stopped beside me as if he wanted to speak. The old me would have looked up immediately. I would have asked what Helen said, whether he was upset, and how I could make everything comfortable again. I kept coloring. After several seconds, Ethan walked away. That night, while I was drawing in the study, he appeared in the doorway for once. He had come looking for me. "Have you been angry with me lately?" No. His brow tightened. He looked at the folding bed where I now slept. The old sketches spread across my desk, and the woman who had gone 3 weeks without chasing him. Then Ethan asked the question. I had spent 10 years waiting for him to care enough to ask. "Then why won't you talk to me anymore?" My pen stopped above the page. For the first time in our marriage, Ethan was the one waiting for an answer. I didn't rush to fill the silence. For 10 years, silence between us had been a vacuum I scrambled to fill with apologies, chatter, and desperate bids for connection. Now, I let the quiet sit in the room. I let him feel its weight. I set the pen down gently. I didn't turn around immediately, taking a moment to look at the lines I had just drawn, a bold, sweeping arch of a building's facade, confident and unbroken. "I'm not angry, Ethan," I said, finally swiveling the chair to face him. He stood in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his sweatpants pockets. He looked completely unmoored, like a man who had stepped off a stair that wasn't there. "If you're not angry, then what is this?" He gestured vaguely toward the folding bed, the scattered papers, the physical distance I had placed between us. "You don't text me. You don't ask about my day. You just stopped." "I did," I agreed, my voice surprisingly steady. It lacked the tight, high pitch of desperation that usually accompanied our rare conversations. I stopped. Why? His brows pulled together, a mix of frustration and genuine bewilderment. Because I realized I was the only one talking, I said softly. And I got tired of speaking into a canyon, waiting for an echo. I talk to you, he replied, defensive now, his posture stiffening. I answer you. You respond, Ethan. You don't engage. There's a difference. I looked at his face, really looked at it, for the first time in weeks. I had spent years studying his micro-expressions, trying to translate his blank stares into love, his sighs into fatigue, his absence into a quiet sort of presence. Now, looking at him, I just saw a man. A perfectly ordinary man who had grown remarkably comfortable being adored without having to adore in return. A few weeks ago, at dinner, Daisy pointed out that you didn't want to talk to me. And, you know what the worst part was? She wasn't being mean. She was just stating a fact. A 6-year-old saw what I had been refusing to see for a decade. Ethan flinched. The mention of Daisy cracked his defensive armor. That's not fair. I work hard. I provide for this family. I'm just tired when I get home. I know you're tired, I said, feeling a strange wave of profound pity, not for myself, but for the script we had both been trapped in. I was tired too, Ethan. When I gave birth. When I was up all night nursing. When I gave up my career. I was exhausted to my bones. But I still looked at you. I still wanted to know you. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The excuses he usually relied on, his mother's platitudes about men needing space, his own rehearsed lines about work stress, seemed to die in his throat against the flat, unaccusing reality of my tone. I'm not punishing you, I continued, turning back toward my desk. I'm just done chasing you. If you want to know me, you know where I am. But I'm not going to force you to look at me anymore. I picked up my pen. I didn't look back to see how he reacted. I heard him stand there for a long, agonizing minute, the friction of his socks against the hardwood floor shifting as his weight transferred from one foot to the other. And then, true to the nature of the man I had married, when faced with an emotional hurdle he was required to jump himself, he simply turned around and walked away. The click of the bedroom door closing across the hall was quiet. I didn't cry. The pillow on the folding bed remained perfectly dry that night. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, wrapped in a blanket of my own making. The shift in our house over the next month was subtle, yet seismic. When you stop fueling a machine that only runs on your energy, it doesn't explode. It just slowly grinds to a halt. The frantic, anxious rhythm of our marriage died, replaced by a polite, echoing domesticity. We were like two strangers assigned to the same group project, coexisting for the sake of our daughter. But as Ethan's world contracted, mine expanded. The gym became a sanctuary. The $3,600 I had spent felt less like an expense, and more like a ransom I had paid for my own body. The physical exhaustion of lifting weights and running on the treadmill purged the residual nervous energy that used to manifest as frantic text messages to my husband. I was rebuilding my core literally and metaphorically. Then there was the drawing. What started as late-night scribbles evolved. The rust peeled away from my mind. I found my old external hard drive in a box in the attic, plugging it in to view my college portfolio and the early drafts I had done before Daisy was born. I spent my nights updating the software on my old laptop, learning the new architectural design programs that had become industry standard while I was busy pureeing peas and ironing Ethan's dress shirts. One Tuesday afternoon, while Daisy was at school, I pulled up the website of the design firm I had rejected years ago. They had grown exponentially, their sleek, sustainable urban designs featured in international magazines. On a whim, or perhaps guided by a newly awakened audacity, I found the email of the senior partner, my old advisor's former colleague, and attached a PDF of my newly updated portfolio. I took a 6-year sabbatical to focus on family management, I wrote, framing my absence not as a surrender, but as a calculated pause. I am now returning to the industry and would value a few minutes of your time to discuss current trends, or any junior positions available. I hit send. I didn't check my phone, obsessively waiting for a reply. I just went to pick up Daisy. Ethan, meanwhile, was beginning to malfunction. Without my constant pursuit to dictate his reactions, he didn't know what to do with his hands. He started lingering in the kitchen while I cooked. He would stand near the island, watching me chop vegetables, waiting for me to ask him about his day. When I didn't, the silence clearly deafened him. Traffic was awful today, he offered one evening, awkwardly leaning against a marble counter. I murmured, sliding chopped onions into a hot pan. They sizzled loudly, filling the space. That's frustrating. I didn't turn to him. I didn't pour him a glass of wine, or ask if he wanted to vent. I kept my eyes on the stove.
Yeah.
The Patterson account is also giving me a headache, he pushed, stepping a little closer. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I replied smoothly, handing Daisy a carrot stick. You always do. Daisy, sweetie, go wash your hands, dinner's almost ready. Ethan stood there, adrift. For a decade, a mere sigh from him would have prompted me to drop everything, massage his shoulders, and coax the words out of him. Now he was offering me breadcrumbs, and I was stepping right over them. He didn't know how to escalate. He lacked the vocabulary for genuine pursuit. So, he resorted to the only tools he had: low-effort gestures. He brought home a bouquet of grocery store tulips one Friday. I put them in a vase, said, "Thank you, they're lovely," and went back to my reading. He tried initiating sex one night by coming into the study and placing a hand on my shoulder. I gently removed his hand, looked him in the eye, and said, "I'm not in the right headspace for that, Ethan.
Good night."
He retreated, looking like a whipped dog. But I felt no guilt. My body, my time, and my emotional labor were no longer a public park for him to wander into whenever he felt mildly bored or lonely. 2 months into my quiet rebellion, I received an email back from the design firm. "Madison, your old advisor spoke highly of you years ago. Your new sketches are raw, but they show a mature understanding of spatial flow that wasn't there before. Come in on Thursday at 10 a.m. Let's talk." I read the email 3 times. My hands shook slightly, but my chest felt expansive, as if my ribs were separating to make room for more air. On Thursday morning, I put on a tailored navy suit I had bought the day before. I applied my makeup with a steady hand, pinned my hair back, and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look like Ethan's clingy wife. I looked like Madison. The interview was grueling. The senior partner, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, didn't pull any punches regarding my gap in employment. 6 years is a lifetime in this industry, she said, tapping her pen against my printed portfolio. Software changes. Building codes change. You're essentially a very talented dinosaur. Software can be learned, I countered, leaning forward slightly, holding her gaze. Codes can be memorized. But the understanding of how humans actually live in a space, how a mother moves through a kitchen, how light affects a child's bedroom, how a house needs to accommodate both connection and isolation, I didn't learn that in a classroom. I learned that in the trenches of the last 6 years. My technical skills are rusty, yes. But my design philosophy has grown up. Put me on a probationary period. Give me the grunt work. I will outwork anyone in your drafting room. Claire stared at me for a long time. The corner of her mouth twitched. 3 months probationary. Junior designer salary. You report to the associate director. You start Monday. I walked out of the glass building and into the bustling city street, the roar of traffic sounding like a symphony. I bought a coffee, sat on a bench, and cried. They were the first tears I had shed in months, and they tasted like pure, unadulterated triumph. That evening, I waited until Daisy was asleep before I went into the living room. Ethan was watching a basketball game on mute, scrolling through his phone. I got a job, I said, standing between him and the television. He blinked, lowering his phone. The blue light faded from his face, replaced by the warm amber of the reading lamp. A job? What kind of job? As an architectural designer at Vanguard Studio. I start on Monday. He stared at me, his brain clearly struggling to process the information. Monday? But what about Daisy? Who's going to pick her up from school? Who's going to make dinner? I will drop her off in the mornings. You will pick her up at 3:30. You'll need to leave work by 3 to make the pickup line. I can't leave work at 3. Ethan stood up, his voice rising in genuine panic. Madison, I'm a senior manager. I have late meetings. I can't just walk out in the middle of the afternoon. Then you'll have to figure it out, I said calmly. Just like I figured it out every single time she was sick, every time she had a half day, every time the pediatrician only had a 2 p.m. slot. You have a weekend to arrange your schedule, speak to your boss, or look into after-school care. I am starting my career. You didn't even discuss this with me, he shouted, the mask of passivity finally cracking. When was the last time we discussed anything, Ethan? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Did we discuss it when you decided to work late 3 nights a week? Did we discuss it when you told me it was better if I stayed home so we wouldn't have to pay a nanny? I'm not asking for your permission. I am informing you of the new reality. I am her father. Then act like it. I shot back, the words slicing through the air. For 6 years, you've been a guest in this house. You swoop in, pat her on the head, eat the dinner I cooked, and retreat to your quiet spaces while I manage the chaos. The vacation is over. You are a parent. It's time to do the work. I turned and walked back to the study, leaving him standing there in the ruins of his comfortable patriarchy. The transition was brutal. My first weeks at Vanguard were a blur of imposter syndrome, steep learning curves, and late nights squinting at CAD software. I came home exhausted, my brain fried from the sheer volume of information I was absorbing. But it was a clean exhaustion. The kind that comes from building something, not the soul-sucking fatigue of tearing yourself into pieces to keep someone else warm. Ethan, conversely, was drowning. On Tuesday of my second week, he forgot to pack Daisy's lunch.
The school called me.
I gave them Ethan's number and told them to call him. He had to leave a meeting to drop off a sandwich. On Thursday, he brought Daisy home and tried to cook dinner. The smoke alarm went off at 7 o'clock. I emerged from my bedroom to find him scrubbing a scorched pan, looking entirely defeated, while Daisy happily ate cereal at the table. "I burned the chicken," he said, not looking at me. "I see that." I poured myself a glass of water. "It's hard," he muttered, gripping the edge of the sink, keeping track of everything. Her homework, the permission slips, the groceries. It's a lot. I leaned against the counter, taking a sip of water. "Yes, it is." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "How did you do it all these years? Alone?" "I had to," I said simply. "Because you didn't." He flinched as if I had struck him. For a moment, I thought he might finally step over the invisible line he drew around himself. I thought he might apologize, truly apologize, and ask how we could rebuild. Instead, his shoulders slumped. "My mom is right. You've become entirely different."
Cold.
The pity I felt for him vanished, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. Even now, drowning in the shallow end of domestic responsibility, he was looking for a way to make it my fault. He couldn't accept that his inaction had consequences, so he labeled my boundaries as coldness. "If respecting myself makes me cold, Ethan, then I am freezing." I set the glass down.
Good night.
By the time the holidays rolled around, I was no longer the junior designer struggling to keep up. I had successfully pitched a redesign for a community center lobby that won over a difficult client. Claire promoted me off probation early, giving me a permanent contract and a raise. At home, a bizarre equilibrium had formed. Ethan had managed to hire an after-school nanny for the days he couldn't leave work early, paying for it out of his own discretionary fund after I refused to manage the logistics. He was doing his own laundry. He was participating in his daughter's life out of sheer necessity. To the outside world, we probably looked like a modern, dual-income family successfully co-parenting. Inside, the marriage was dead. The corpse was just sitting in the living room, dressed in nice clothes, while we politely ignored the smell. The breaking point arrived not with a shout, but with a whisper. It was a Saturday night in late January. Daisy was at a sleepover at a friend's house. The house was painfully quiet. I was in the living room, sketching a concept for a new residential project, listening to a jazz record. Ethan came downstairs, hovering awkwardly near the sofa. He was holding 2 glasses of wine. He set one down on the side table next to me. "Thanks," I murmured, not looking up from my tablet. He sat on the opposite end of the sofa. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. "Madison," he finally said, his voice cracking slightly. "Can we talk?" I paused my stylus. "About what?"
About us.
"About whatever this is." He dragged a hand down his face. He looked older, the stress of the past few months carving lines around his eyes. "I can't do this anymore. This living like roommates. I miss my wife." "Your wife is right here," I said. "No, she isn't. The woman I married, she loved me. She wanted to be with me. She cared about what I did." "The woman you married starved to death, Ethan," I said, turning to face him. The words came out without malice, just a tragic statement of fact. "You starved her. She begged you, for scraps of attention. She begged you to hold her when she was breaking under the weight of raising your child alone. She sent you thousands of messages into the void, hoping you would just turn around and look at her. You didn't. So she died. I'm what's left. I'm trying now," he pleaded, leaning forward, his eyes desperate. "I'm doing the pickups. I'm paying for the nanny. I'm trying to talk to you. You're not trying to know me, Ethan. You're trying to put things back to the way they were. You're putting quarters in a vending machine that's already empty, getting angry that your favorite candy isn't falling out. So what? That's it? 10 years, and you're just throwing it away." I didn't throw it away. I set it down because it was too heavy to carry by myself anymore. I looked at his handsome, panicked face. "You want a wife who orbits you. A woman who makes your life seamless, who manages your home, raises your child, and strokes your ego while demanding nothing in return but the privilege of being ignored by you. I am never going to be that woman again. I love you, he whispered, the words sounding rusty, as if he hadn't used them in a decade. I know you think you do, I replied gently. But you don't love me, Ethan. You love the comfort I provided. You love the Madison who made your life easy. You don't even know the Madison sitting in front of you.
He didn't argue.
He couldn't. The truth was laid out between us, undeniable and absolute. He stared at his hands, a tear finally slipping down his cheek. It was a tragedy of his own making, a slow-motion car crash he had 10 years to swerve away from. But he had just kept his foot off the pedals, assuming the road would forever rise to meet him. I want a divorce, I said. The words didn't feel heavy. They felt like exhaling a breath I had been holding for a third of my life. He closed his eyes.
He didn't fight me.
He didn't yell. In the end, he did what Ethan always did. He yielded to the momentum of someone else's decision. The legal dismantling of a decade is a strange, bureaucratic process. There were mediators, spreadsheets, and endless signatures. We agreed on joint custody. I kept the house. I bought out his equity using a loan secured against my new salary and a small inheritance from my grandmother I had never touched. Ethan moved into a sleek, soulless apartment closer to his office. His mother, Helen, called me once, furious, accusing me of destroying her son's life. He's a grown man, Helen, I told her calmly. He'll have to learn how to sweep his own floors. Then I hung up and blocked her number. The first weekend Daisy went to Ethan's new apartment, I walked through my quiet house. It belonged entirely to me. I took the folding bed out of the study and threw it in the dumpster. I bought a massive drafting table and placed it right in the center of the room. I painted the walls a vibrant, pulsing emerald green. I was 32 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I was not waiting for a door to open. I was the one holding the keys. 2 years later.
Mom.
Look at the perspective on this. Daisy's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I looked across the wide oak dining table, my table in my house. My 8-year-old daughter was holding up a sketchpad. She had drawn a surprisingly accurate rendition of our living room, focusing on the way the afternoon light hit the sofa. The vanishing point is excellent, baby. I smiled, reaching over to tap the paper. You really nailed the shadows. Dad said it looked like a messy room, but he doesn't know anything about art, she chirped matter-of-factly, going back to her shading. I chuckled softly, taking a sip of my coffee. Ethan and I had found a rhythm in our divorce that we never found in our marriage. Without me there to catch his slack, he was forced to actually parent on his weekends. He learned how to braid Daisy's hair, poorly, but he tried. He learned her favorite foods, her teachers' names, the exact brand of markers she liked. He was a better father in our separation than he ever had been in our union. We spoke cordially when we handed her off. He looked at me sometimes with a lingering, melancholic regret, but I felt nothing but a distant, polite fondness for the man he was trying to become. I had stopped carrying his potential, and in doing so, allowed him to finally carry himself. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Claire at Vanguard. The city council approved your waterfront pavilion design. Drinks on me tomorrow to celebrate. I smiled, typing back a quick, confident affirmative. I set the phone down and looked around the sunlit dining room. I didn't measure my days by someone else's attention anymore. I measured them by the lines I drew, the spaces I built, and the laughter of the little girl sitting across from me. I picked up my pen, pressed it to a fresh sheet of paper, and began to draw, the sound of the graphite scratching against the page the only echo I would ever need.